the metaverse, a very exciting topic that we hear all about, even in the media now. And so today we are here with a few people who are thinking about really important aspects around the metaverse. So hopefully we can have a very informative session today with some of our leading experts. You also see here a device, and you will find out later what it is. So please, that's something to look forward to. But without further ado, I just want to remind you all that we are here in Toronto in person, as well as with remote participants, and we are also recording this session, so it will be available for viewing afterwards. Again, thank you all for joining us, and at this stage I will hand it over to our first speaker, Dr. Yu Yuan, who will kick us off by talking about the landscape around metaverse. Yu, please go ahead.
Yes, okay, let me share my screen. Well, we're talking about such a buzzword. It's such a big pity that I cannot join you in person, so we have to do this in the metaverse way. Could you see my screen? Moria, could you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. So, well, regarding the topic of metaverse, it's easier for me to kill 2 hours on this topic, but let me try to. It's a challenge for me to give a landscape and outlook overview in 10 minutes, so I'll do my best. I'm listing some of my volunteer positions just in order to show that the metaverse is not a new thing. It's about all of this, like VR and AR, like photonics, optics, like blockchain, are currently recognized as related areas. So we have been working in these areas for many years. We just have not yet called that core work metaverse. Okay, so let me go ahead. Again, the opinions are just mine, not necessarily the opinions of IEEE or IEEE. So let's let me try to minimize. Okay, so let's just look back a brief history of the metaverse. This keyword, this term, was started it was coined by Neil Stephenson in 1992 in his science fiction book, Snow Crash. And then in 2003, Philip Rossdale, who founded a company called the Linden Lab, they launched a very popular I would say application, Second Life. It is still live, and Second Life has been recognized as the first embodiment of the concept metaverse. And then 2021, Roblox went to IPO, and they described themselves as a metaverse company. So that's one of the reasons why the metaverse has become so hot since early 2021. But later in October 2021, the big company, Facebook, renamed itself as Meta, and claims that what they will be doing is to do a metaverse business, focusing on metaverse, social and other business in metaverse. So that actually further encouraged people to discuss the keyword, the term metaverse, and it is now a very popular, very hot term all over the world. But so many people are giving different definitions for the metaverse. So what is the original definition? This is from Neil Stephenson, the author of Snow Crash, his Twitter a couple of days ago. He was saying, like, in his book, it is all about VR. So that is actually the original concept of the metaverse. although many people have been extending the concept for maybe too much. So this is my definition. I have been trying to achieve a balance between sticking to the original concept and also trying to accommodate the new extensions under the term metaverse. So my definition, this is important. So please bear with me. I read this. So metaverse may refer to a kind of experiences in which the outside world is perceived by the users, human or non-human, as being a universe that is actually built upon digital technologies, as a different universe, which is virtual reality, or a digital extension of our current universe, which is augmented reality or mixed reality, or a digital counterpart of our current universe, which is digital twin. Named after the universe, a metaverse shall be persistent and should be massive, comprehensive, immersive, and self-consistent. Described with meta, a metaverse should be ultra-realistic, accessible, pervasive, and may be decentralized. In another sense, metaverse may be simply defined as persistent virtual reality, and in the broad sense, metaverse is the advanced stage and the long-term vision of digital transformation. So let me try to explain this. George Berkeley said hundreds of years ago, to be is to be perceived. That's why I'm describing a metaverse as something perceived by users. You can even imagine that like either a VR headset or your cell phone screen, if it is not perceived by you as a virtual world, it is no more than just a pile of pixels. So that's why perception is very important. And in terms of the necessary or optional features, after the keyword, the term metaverse got very hot, I have been thinking what is the key difference between metaverse and VR? Because we have been doing VR for decades, but what is the key point that the term metaverse is highlighting while the keyword VR is not? So I think I found the difference is persistent. If we are talking about some one-time VR experiences, that is not the so-called metaverse. Metaverse has to be a lasting or persistent experience. So that's why I put persistent as a shall be future for metaverse. And we have several should be features for the metaverse, but I'm not going to discuss them in details. And decentralized, I'll address this later. I think that is just an optional feature for the metaverse. It is not a key feature or a core feature as many people think about. So this picture actually shows my understanding of the core technologies for the metaverse. We need a brain-machine interface. Actually, the current virtual reality, augmented reality, or XR devices can also be considered as some kind of brain-machine interface. So we need persistent computing, which would be a series of technologies to support the existence and the operation of persistent virtual worlds, based on persistent virtual worlds and based on whatever devices can provide the brain-machine interface or the current XR devices. We can have virtual senses and actions, and we can also have optional technology like blockchain supporting virtual assets, and the virtual assets should also be built upon persistent virtual worlds. And together we have persistent virtual worlds and the virtual senses and actions, and we have the persistent virtual reality. That's the narrow sense of the metaverse. But in the broad sense, I told you before that I'm trying to accommodate most of the existing extensions of the original concept of metaverse. So in a broad sense, metaverse is an advanced stage of and the long-term version of digital transformation. We can say various vertical industries are being transformed by digital technologies like AI, like XR, blockchain, IoT, etc. So the advanced or the convergence stage is actually the metaverse. So this is my definition, but I also wanted to highlight some key points that what is not the metaverse. Of course, NFT and Web3 recently have become too dominant in the metaverse-related public opinion field, which I strongly disagree. So I would say that NFT is not the metaverse. Why? Because today we have seen lots of propaganda that add the metaverse label on NFTs that have no use value, but only the so-called collection value or investment value. But collecting and investing, if we look at our current world, current life, only a small part of our real life today. And I believe the mainstream demand of mankind for the metaverse will never be collection and investment. Also, Web3 is not the metaverse either. Web3 people like to talk about ownership, but I think that is just a trick. What really matters to users is use and service, not ownership. I don't believe that. Today, if we look at other industries, it is increasingly being advocated that even transportation should be a shared service. That does not require everyone to own a private vehicle. Then why should we just tell people that, hey, you need to own a portion of the internet or a portion of the metaverse? So I think that is nonsense. So again, so NFT and Web3 are neither the metaverse nor the necessary elements of the metaverse. They are no more than optional elements that may be useful to the metaverse in some cases. But again, that is just my opinion. So of course, we're about landscape and outlook. But let me give this is about real life.
All right, it looks like use connection froze up. Oh, and we were just chatting. Okay. Yep, I see. Let's see if he gets the text. But then we were just about approaching the end. So then with that, let's move to our next presenter. And so now we have Steve Mann will be presenting next, and the clicker is right here.
Don't want to get too close to the speaker.
I'm back.
Oh, all right. We lost you there for a minute. So,
well, that's the metaverse way. Okay, so let me continue. I'll be finishing this soon. So the next challenge would be virtual world. How to build a large-scale, fine-grained, persistent, and physically self-consistent virtual world. Like currently in the virtual world, imagine a lake. When can you just not only boating on that, but you can jump into that for swimming or washing your face with a handful of water, which means we need to have the virtual water being able to interact with other virtual objects and completely in line with physical laws such as fluid mechanics, things like that. And even scientists could not find any flaws to tell that is a virtual world. So that's the second grand challenge. So again, this is my opinion. But in order to provide comprehensive and I would say insights, comprehensive and authoritative global view. We gathered 11 top experts to provide their insights on the metaverse. So that's something we did recently. And this report, we named that Metaverse Decoded by Top Experts, include the definition of the metaverse, what concepts are currently labeled as the metaverse but are not actually the metaverse, biggest technical challenge, most noteworthy risk from ESG perspective, and the sign that the metaverse is really facing an explosive growth. And also we have predictions for the metaverse by industry and by application scenarios. So this report, you can download that. I put a link at the bottom of my screen. We gathered experts, including myself, including Steve Mann, including Tom Furness, who is recognized as a grandfather of virtual reality, Philip Rossdale, who is the founder of Second Life. We have Neil Trevitt, who is president of Kronos and also VP of NVIDIA. We have Rev, who is also VP of NVIDIA in charge of Omniverse. We have Kathleen, who is head of AR hardware in Meta. Daniel Lange, senior VP of AI in Unity. Evelyn, who is former NASA chief engineer and the VR and AR pioneer. And we have Ori Imbar, who is the co-founder of the AWE, the largest XR expo in the world. And Masu Bo, who is widely acclaimed metaverse thought leader. So the first report is already ready for free download. We are going to do another 2 reports. One is technology patents and the standards, and the other one is market and investment, to be released in September and December respectively. So again, this is non-IEEE work, but we are going to, my plan is to, based on this work, we may come to produce some IEEE white paper in the coming few months. So that's my presentation, and I put a QR code on my screen for you to download the report. Thank you. Guess I need to stop my sharing.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for sharing your opinions on this. I think, as you say, there's a lot of debate still about the terminology and about the evolution, and so thanks for sharing your opinion. Now we will move to Steve. Steve Mann will hopefully solve the mystery of this beautiful device, and also, of course, talk about the future of the metaverse and how he sees the evolution.
Is it working? Hello, my name's Steve Mann, and I want to talk a little bit about the metaverse, what it means to me. I guess I've been living in the metaverse since I was about 12 years old when I built this sort of wearable computing system in my childhood. And I've been playing around in this sort of metaverse. I called it metavision, actually, in my childhood. I coined the term metavision, the vision of vision, sensing sensors and sensing their capacity to sense, sensing of senses. And I guess so the metaverse is the universe of the universe. And so I'll just briefly go back to the slides for a second. Does that advance, or is it working? Oh, there it is. So I was born in Hamilton, Ontario, near Toronto, grew up here, and then I was accepted at MIT and went down there and brought my wearable computing invention to MIT to found the MIT Wearable Computing Project. And while I was there, I invented a few other things like HDR, high dynamic range imaging, and other kind of metaverse technologies, which was of great interest to Stanford University. So I was brought over to the West Coast and helped a lot of companies on the West Coast. So it took me a while to graduate from my PhD because I was distracted helping lots of companies on the West Coast get started. So I bounced back and forth between the East Coast and the West Coast. And this is some of the kind of evolution. I had the early days of this living in the metaverse all the time, persistent, as Yu Yuan says. persistent metaverse all the time, part of my body. So it became interesting, things like getting a passport and those sorts of things became interesting rites of passage, I guess, having officials recognize this as a valid form of lifestyle, permanently being kind of in this world. This is one of my inventions, is HDR, high dynamic range imaging, many years ago. Well, my grandfather taught me to weld in my early childhood, and I developed these kinds of vision seeing aids and so on. We all know what standing waves are. The sum of two waves traveling in opposite directions, like in a violin string or a skipping rope. I invented something I call sitting waves, which is the product of two waves traveling in the same direction. And so this is meta sensing, meta vision. And so, for example, I've got we like to build smartphones, and this is a smartphone, and this is the sequential wave imprinting machine, and it allows us to see the waveform coming from the smartphone. And so as I see that wave, if I block this radio wave with one finger, if I put one finger over the smartphone, it'll reduce or attenuate 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers. So when I have my hand over it, it blocks it pretty much to 0, whereas otherwise it allows the wave stronger, closer to the phone, and weaker, further away. And so this is metavision, sensing of sensing, which I discovered by having, I discovered that I could photograph electromagnetic radio waves, for example, and see things that were otherwise invisible in this persistent alternate reality that I could share with other people. In this case, I shared it with all of you without any eyeglasses or anything. You can see this metaverse without any special eyewear. The metaverse is persistent and visible to everybody. This is the metaverse all around us. This is how the world, how my world sees, is sensing of sensing sensors and sensing their capacity to sense. This is in the cadaver lab, practicing a new surgical procedure using the sequential wave imprinting machine, using this sonar navigation. And then once you practice the surgical procedure, you try it on real humans and help people develop new technologies at Stanford here to help people. This is the machine that we built in collaboration with Sun Yat-sen University. This is the metaverse, showing the metaverse. This is sound waves. These are 2 microphones and their capacity to listen. That's 2 Shure SM58 microphones and a photograph of their capacity to listen. And we can see the interference pattern in the capacity to listen. So this is sensing sensors and sensing their capacity to sense, meta sensing. A meta conversation is a conversation about conversations. A meta joke is a joke about jokes. Meta argument is an argument about arguments. Metadata is data about data, like the JPEG header file that tells you when and where the photograph was taken. So meta vision is the vision of vision. Meta sensing is the sensing of sensing, or metavalence, I called it. We founded a company called Meta and raised $75 million in California. I was involved in the founding of quite a few companies, some of them successful, some of them not successful. This is kind of my philosophy on life. So we've got these 3 axes. Negroponte would sort of agree with bits and atoms, and then I've added a 3rd axis, genes, the smallest unit of human expression at the origin. As these axes come out, it's physical scale, virtual, and valence, so that you have suvalence and surveillance. And we can say the technology that becomes part of us, the clothing analogy. Very funny, Scotty, now beam up my clothes. That kind of joke suggests that clothing is part of us. We think of clothing as part of us. Another example is in the parking lot, when the car bumps into another car, the one driver says, "You hit me," not "your car hit my car." We think of the car as part of ourselves. And this is what I talk about, cyborg technology. And I argue that cyborgs have been around for more than 1 million years. Manfred Klein's coined the term cyborg, and his favorite example was a person riding a bicycle, but that's only 200 years old. But I argue that vessels, people on vessels, predate bicycles, and vessels are older than the invention of clothing, older than the invention of the wheel, and have been around longer than Homo sapiens. So cyborgs have been around for more than 1 million years. The metaverse has 2 parts to it: the environment, that which surrounds us, and the environment, which is ourselves. And the environment is the boundary between the environment and the environment. This is another example here. So the environment and the environment, and that ball is the boundary between the environment and the environment. And so this is a kind of a diagram that shows that concept. And the metaverse is the interplay of the environment, what we call environmentalism, the play on environment and environment. And I argue that we talked about X-reality. So Charles Wyckoff and I came up with the concept of extended reality in 1991. We invented and created this notion of extended reality, and we defined XR as this kind of all-over reality, kind of like the metaverse. But a little bit before, about a year before Neil Stephenson came up with the metaverse, Charles Wyckoff and I came up with X-reality. And this 31 years ago, X-reality, what we're eventually arguing is that the origin of reality is a sensory deprivation tank where you have no reality. And then you have axes of reality that come out from that. So this is our kind of concept of reality, all reality. At the origin, you've got a sensory deprivation float tank with nothing in it. And then we have a VR float tank where you've put on a VR headset, and we call it immersivity. And join us tomorrow at the beach to experience a little bit of immersivity. But when you're floating in the water, you can believe anything. And you're sort of floating in free space. And then we've got these axes coming out of that, reality and virtuality, or axes coming out of that. And this is kind of the all reality. This is examples of immersivity and different kinds of reality that are persistent and shareable across cyberspace. I can have a water fight with someone in a different country, and that's a very real experience. It's not lived through a screen, but it's lived through a very visceral, real touch and feel experience. And so these hydraulophones, for example, are examples of these kinds of reality interfaces and connection to a very meaningful interpretation or understanding of the metaverse that goes beyond just cyborg technologies on a screen to something that we can touch and feel and be part of. This is a little lab I put together in Copenhagen and some of our research projects. And tomorrow, this is what join the Facebook group. Our Facebook group is Swim OP, Swim at Ontario Place, Swim Op. And in that group, we have an event called Immersivity. And so anyway, I want to show a little example here. This hydraulophone is a musical instrument that is kind of tied to this notion of reality at the nexus of water, humans, and technology. So here we have So I'll have this Nessie around here out in the foyer if people want to play around afterwards. And you can see as I vary the amount of flow here, each of the water jets contributes. So this notion of water, humans, and technology, at the nexus of water, humans, and technology, and immersivity is what we call it, immersive technology. If we go back right to my beginning, the notion of immersivity is what we talk about. It's kind of the next thing beyond the metaverse, I guess, is this idea of immersivity and submersivity and being immersed in the technology. For example, when you put on a VR headset, you can experience something, but going for a swim, for example, is something that's very real, as opposed to just walking around looking at stuff, sightseeing. So when we go to a new country, the first thing whenever I go somewhere is I say, let's go for a swim, or let's experience something real, rather than just looking at go to a museum and look at art, because I can do that virtually. But what you can't do is jump off a bridge into the ocean And in a virtual world, it's at least not now anyway. So these very real things, because of my life as a cyborg, people have called me the world's first cyborg, and the invention of XR and HDR and all these cybernetic things, I've come to want to live like I did in my childhood when I was 12 years old, which was to touch and feel real things. And so reality is really at the heart of this. And there's a really important understanding or grounding, if you will, in what reality is and what reality means. So that's kind of, we wrote a number of research papers on all reality. Yuan and I have written about this, Tom Furness and I, various people. We've all been writing for the last many, many years about what is reality and what is the metaverse and what is immersivity. And so anyway, I'd be happy to take any questions or anything like that on this stuff. And I hope many of you come out tomorrow for our swim at downtown Toronto's only beach. It's a beautiful pebble beach. There's no sand or grit or grime. So you don't need to bring a blanket. You can just put your clothes right on the nice fine pebbles and go for a swim in the crystal clear water with the underwater XR eyeglasses and sort of experience this whole magical world. The water is quite warm now. We went for a nice long swim yesterday and just in our briefs. And we swam out to the buoy lane marker and back, or we'll swim sometimes out to the mouth of the break wall, or sometimes we'll swim across to the Toronto Island. It's good to have a tow float or safety visibility marker if you're going to swim too far out into where there's boat traffic. But if you don't have a tow float or safety visibility marker, then it's better to stay inside the little indented cove. It's a nice south-facing little nook right by Ontario Place. If you go past the Sinosphere there, and it's quite warm, the sun heats it up beautifully. It's a little nook, and it almost feels like you're in Lake Temagami or Gravenhurst way up north. It doesn't feel like you're in downtown Toronto. It's really beautiful, idyllic sort of place to kind of hang out if you want to join us tomorrow and experience a little bit of what the metaverse really is. I'd be happy to take any questions.
If I may ask people to hold the questions until after Monique's talk, and then we'll do questions at the end, if that's okay.
Perfect.
And the other thing is Steve asked me to help promote the swim tomorrow. I don't think I could have done a better job. It sounds amazing and beautiful. So, we do have also the details if you want to sign up.
Yeah, and also you can sign up on the Facebook page.
Yeah.
Maybe I think it's there's a link there or whatever,
Yeah.
we can sign up.
We'll share it. Yep. All right. So then thank you for that. And thank you for demonstrating. I look forward to trying it afterwards. But let's shift to Monique.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess I can go ahead and share.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that'll be great. I think Steve has to stop sharing. There we go. Well, listen, the work when we talk about ethics is really inspired by Stephen Yuan. And so it's a wonderful way to follow in terms of the metaverse and ethical considerations. Fundamentally, what I do is I am the co-chair of the IEEE, Industry Connections, Ethics, and Extended Reality. And also note that I'm the chair for IEEE P7030 for the Global Ethics Working Group. But I guess the question is, who are we? And so my co-chair is Mathana. Mathana goes by the gender pronouns they and them. And you can see who we are from an ex-com or team, including Professor Letty Magina from the University of Dublin. We are very, very eclectic. We have fundamentally we're very mixed group of industry practitioners, as I say here, VR journalists, academics, and accessibility advocates, and digital rights activists, and tech ethicists. I guess the way to look at how we would define sort of this landscape of extended reality and ethics is really from Kent Bai, who is a VR podcaster, but now, he's also a journalist, and has basically, as a member of our community, kind of deconstructed of what the concerns will be and are, and I might add, this is emerging work as a corpus of work in terms of ethics and this world of extended reality, which is a tangential relationship, if you will, to the metaverse overall, because there are some ethical issues that we have to, consider. And so whether or not you're talking about yourself, biometric data, education, entertainment, medicine, death, and how do you handle what is you in various digital and, let's say, in entities, what does that look like, and so on. So what you see here is fundamentally a deconstruction of the work that we have published. And so I'm going to kind of go over a little bit about that work in the next few slides. But I think ethics is very, very contextual. I'm going to kind of take it from accessibility. Well, because I was in a VR, an accessibility event last week. And if we don't have accessibility here, then we have to think about who are we addressing our discussion. And I learned a lot in that accessibility conference. So ethics is contextual. So we can think about it as a socio-technological code, human to machine code. We can think of it as a human choice, where you look at how you have the opportunity to have these certain interactions with your particular virtues. What are systems? What are the choice-based systems that we choose to build upon? So that's a human choice. And we look at, what happens with vision impairment, support for headsets, and so on. And that's ethics as a societal value. So fundamentally looking at, what does that mean in terms of the principles that we think about and for cyber physical systems that we are defining, especially around platforms, headsets, and systems. So some of the issues, and one of the co-authors of a corpus of papers, and there were 8 papers, particularly on the accessibility, basically looked at, some of the things that we have to be concerned about in terms of why this is a very big concern with regard to discrimination, what happens when people are, human beings are excluded from a digital world, and where inaccessibility is not, for them, right? And so this becomes an extremely important issue in terms of how do we create an extended, again, in the context of ethics, an extended reality world that is accessible to all. And if the next few slides will take snippets of the papers and some of the recommendations. For example, in medicine, which is still very much emerging, some of the things that we have to think about is how do we deal with privacy and its use, misuse and or abuse? What happens to, the implication here is unregulated XR could lead to unfavorable outcomes. And of course, how do we embed these ethics in the decision-making process? So we have to think about the development, if you will, of an XR ethics framework, addressing some of these issues, and of course, development of a medical XR decision-making model, so that we have actually looking at how do we have a roadmap for collaborators and stakeholders in this space. In terms of education, Dr. Eleni Magnini has led a lot of work here and has published a lot of work in this particular space. Some of the issues that we have to think about are, how do you deal with authentic learning experiences and blending learning experiences, or training in the workforce, looking at some of the frameworks that she and her team have actually recommended, or providing digital, strategy for schools and learning frameworks, and also looking at establishing XR technologies to ethically create, if you will, knowledge and content and 3D artifacts. And so this is some of the issues around understanding what learning assessments and strategies are all about. Ethics in extended reality also have an issue when we're looking at social and multi-use spaces in VR, trolling and harassment and online safety. So, some of the things about how do we protect users in immersive worlds? What kinds of types of harassment would we imagine experiencing, whether it's trolling with regard to instigating conflict or hostility in this immersive world, if you will? What are the emotional responses that we could ascertain? What about griefing, which is in really the act of deliberately irritating and harassing other players, especially in the multimodal world of gaming, and identity-based target harassment around racism and xenophobia and vocal misogyny. And then, of course, then another issue that we have published a paper on is around gender-based and sexual harassment, which could be problematic, especially when we're talking about these worlds where the physical representation of sexual violence can be trauma-inducing. In the issue, which is an area that I co-published, is around the erosion of anonymity and privacy. Some of the areas that we have to think about is what happens in all of this world that come together, where where is the privacy, where's that domain of privacy exist? So we have to think about perhaps looking at how we develop and support or standardize on something like differential privacy that comes out of Harvard, and or other privacy protocols for the protection of our individual identities, for protection of us. And of course, some of the discussions have been around neural rights and looking at how we would adopt some proposals around neural rights to ensure that mental privacy or users are not violated when we are thinking about these extended worlds, extended realities. The other one, one of my colleagues who's been very, very prolific in publishing in this particular space is around who owns your second lives in terms of your virtual clones and the right to your identity. So to speak of what is the sum of your all parts when we're thinking about these digital instantiations of who we are. So the virtual clone could be, the thing about it is how do you assure that you have ownership of that clone? How do you assure that you have ownership of the likeness of who you are, and what that whole identity composition in an extended reality world looks like? What does that all mean, and who owns it? Who owns it? And so these are part of the discussions that we've been having and published in terms of this whole ethical issues. In terms of business, this is one of my last slides, is business and finance and economics. A lot to be said here, especially when we're talking about governments and cybersecurity and the right to privacy, especially if we're looking at big tech companies. So is there a potential, for example, the misuse of your data? For example, what would that look like in terms of instantiation of antisocial behavior? And what would these would we create a digitally divided worlds between haves and have-nots? Some of the discussions around socioeconomics and finance, which I think are going to be interesting for corpus of further research, has been around looking at how you would think about having governments and foundations to look at having tax levying or grant making bodies integrating XR ethical standards into the requirements for potential tax breaks and research grants from the very beginning. To state from the very beginning, we want to understand how you are dealing with this whole notion of extended reality from an ethical perspective if you want to have a grant. And so again, the use of differential privacy, which is very, very interesting, could be one way to think about it. And so our call to action is please join us. This is the discussion is continuing. We have papers that have been published. I've just given you a snapshot of what that looks like, and we look forward to having you all part of the community. I do want to once again thank IEEE for hosting this event, but also bear in mind that, as I said before, Steve Mann and Yu Yuan are really, really pioneers in this work. Yu Yuan has been a sponsor of the work that we've been engaged in. So thank you.
Thank you, Monique. And oh, great. I see we already have now the panel set up, or we would be happy to take questions. We have heard really three really important aspects. And I do appreciate that we had the different themes represented. I want to first offer any questions to the room before we look at whether we have questions from online, and otherwise I have one or two questions. I know we started a little late, so we will keep the questions a little shorter and probably end in about 5 or 10 minutes. But we do have a few questions and want to give people opportunity as well. So do we have any questions? Please, and microphone.
You mentioned, I think, an interesting technology is to show the waves. So I'm curious is this any sorts of wave you can show up? Because I heard from microphones or something like this, but I did not know how you proceed these waves, because the waves have a completely high rate, and you reduce it to a smaller rate, for example, from gigahertz or a megahertz to slower frequency. Is this right? Or
Yes, that's right. So it kind of shears the space-time continuum. So if you look at the speed at which my hand is moving, it's relatively slow compared to the speed of light.
Yeah.
And so the frequency shift is relatively small compared to the 10 gigahertz of this transmitter. So the ratio of the speed of which my hand's moving to the speed of light is the ratio of the frequency Doppler shift to the frequency of this.
Mm-hmm.
So the Doppler shift here is just, on the order of a few cycles per second.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of almost in the audio range if you listen to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it's shearing the space-time continuum to bring the reality into waves that are sitting still. So it becomes a function of space rather than time. And so you see, if I move slowly, the dot bobs up and down kind of slowly. And if I move a little faster, the dot bobs up and down a little faster. And if I move at medium speed, it goes up and down at medium speed. And if I move really fast, it goes up and down really fast. It doesn't matter how slow or fast I'm moving. It follows the same trajectory because the Doppler shift happens to cancel out the propagatory effects of the waves. And I discovered this by accident when I was playing around. My dad got me a cathode ray oscillograph, an oscilloscope that was broken when I was about 12 years old. So my favorite childhood toy, an RCA cathode ray oscillograph. And it was about 40 years old when I got it. And the time base didn't work on it. The dot only went up and down. So I was impatient and I wanted to see something on my scope. So I threw it on a piece of plywood with skateboard wheels on it. We called it sidewalk surfing then. We used to take pieces of plywood and put roller skate wheels on them. And now it's called skateboarding. But back then it was called sidewalk surfing. And I just rolled it back and forth like this. And I could see something on the screen. And by accident, I had it connected to a marine radar set. And I could see this wave on the screen. And I thought, wow, that's really neat. I'm seeing some piece of reality that's otherwise invisible. And this was that light bulb moment when I said, in a sense, I'm shearing the space-time continuum. And I wrote a lot about it. It's called the sequential wave imprinting machine, SWIM, sequential wave imprinting machine. And if you search that up, we've written some of my students have written PhD theses on it. And so it started out, when I went down to MIT, I had this with me. I showed it as part of my sort of portfolio of submission, and a number of professors said, wow, that's really interesting. How does that work? And then about a week later, they'd say, oh, I get it. It's kind of like a strobe. Some people say it's like a strobe light flashing on something that makes it look, you can see it sitting still. Or there's different ways of understanding kind of how it's working. It's in a sense, it's a multi-component lock-in amplifier. I invented a new kind of lock-in amplifier that simultaneously captures multiple frequency components of the signal.
Thank you. And I saw we have another question.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks to all the panelists. I was curious about the idea of sensors that sense, and the whole idea of sensors that sense. And so my question is...
Sensors that sense other sensors, you mean?
Yeah, I couldn't say it as the way you said it.
Meta-sensing.
Because you have to think about what that means. But do you think we can get to a point where we can sense our consciousness or sense our thoughts?
That's kind of something I've been...
not just in the living body, but when the body dies as well?
Well, what I've been working on is sensing thoughts. We founded a company in my home. At home, I have a lab, and we founded a company called Interaxon that makes a product called Muse brain sensor. And the brain sensor is an example. So being able to sense brain waves and sense brain activity. So Meta is all about not just the sensing of sensors and the sensing of senses. It's not just XR, X reality, but it's also extended intelligence. And so with the IEEE, I'm one of the 50 founding members of the Council on Extended Intelligence, the CXI. And so Charles Wyckoff and I in 1991 set forth this vision for extended reality and extended intelligence, sort of the predecessor of the metaverse. I guess XR is really the predecessor of the metaverse. And in some ways, some of the science fiction follows this science. I've been talking to a lot of science fiction writers, like David Brin was talking to me. And when he talked to me, he said, wow, that would make great grist for a book. So I also sometimes call it surveillance. Like surveillance means oversight, watching from above. And if here in Canada, a lot of people speak French, S-O-U-S means under. And so surveillance means undersight, and metavalence. And surveillance asks who watches the watchers, but metavalence asks the deeper question, I think, what watches the watching, or what senses the sensing. And that's very meta. This whole notion of meta is something that kind of gelled in my head in the 1970s, but it really does apply to brain-computer interfaces. It applies to sort of reading. So one of the things we built in my lab is a thought-reading camera that it can take pictures without using a camera. So we had somebody look at an object, and we're reading from the brain, able to construct a picture of what they're looking at without using a camera. So the first thing we did is we took a no cameras allowed sign, a no photography sign, and we had somebody stare at the sign for a while, and we extracted an image that's recognizable. You can see the circle with the line through it and the camera symbol and the no cameras allowed. And we were able to actually take a picture without using a camera, but like kind of one of the things we were doing, the lock-in amplifier that we used on meta sensing and sensing into the brain. So if you look into that, you'll find there's a lot of connection to brain-computer interface, BCI. Meta is really not just eyeglasses, but it's also everywhere. It's persistent sensing, persistent sensing and senses, and persistent sharing of senses and meta senses. Meta is kind of recursive because meta is about meta in some sense.
Thank you. Did we have any other responses to that? No.
Well, I just have a quick comment. I think another question we may need to consider, but we don't have a short answer, is that do you really believe your consciousness is sitting in this world? So that is relative to the future that you would predict, the future of AI. So if you believe your consciousness is sitting in this world, then you probably will believe that uploading of your consciousness will become possible. But some other people, including myself, I don't believe that. So that's a long story. So we need extended discussions for that. Just some quick comment.
Actually, that's what we call deconsciousness. We had this thing we talked about, we had a conference called Deconsciousness, and we're kind of looking at this idea. Martine Rotblat, good friend of mine, she came up with this concept of beams, the smallest unit of being. Beams are sort of these units of consciousness. And so her theory was that we can preserve consciousness. And what we're trying to do is create these transfer functions, this meta, this meta universe or meta sensing is a lot about creating what the transfer function of the human brain to preserve consciousness, and possibly, if it was possible to restore or back up consciousness, it would be through meta vision and meta sensing. That's what deconsciousness tries to do, is to look at that as a way of, as a framework for capturing and recording consciousness as a lifelong recording of responses to various things. If you have enough data, big data, enough meta sensing, all of your senses are in XR. So if we had XR and XI extended reality, extended intelligence lifelong since childhood, continuously captured and transfer function with AI, we could build a pretty accurate model of the consciousness.
Wow. Thank you. So we have another question in the room here.
Thank you, everyone. My question is actually for all the three panelists. I think the whole concept about metaverse is really interesting, but as this technology progresses and as it makes inroad into the society, has this whole idea about creating a safe environment, creating an ethical environment, or creating something that's secure been considered as part of your studies or analysis? Like, how are we going to address those aspects of it? Because metaverse is going to have a major impact compared to where we are right now. And right now we are seeing all the issues with security, ethics, and all those things popping up with the technology that's prevalent now. But we are talking here about a metaverse which is leaps higher in terms of creating a virtual world. So there will be all these aspects that is going to have a long-lasting impact on human life.
Yeah, so definitely that security is a big thing. Security is a Latin word. It means without care. So it means without, and curity means care. So the word security, the closest English translated word is carelessness. So security approximately equals carelessness. And so in other words, security, call security, people say. That means call some authority, call the police. And instead, what about if we looked after it ourselves? So I wrote a paper in the IEEE called SUICurity. SUI means self, as in suicide prevention or anything like that. SUI is a Latin prefix meaning self. So I said the opposite of security would be curity, which is care. But I think what we really mean is SUICurity, SUICurity, which means self-care. And that's really important. What we need is security. So for example, surveillance is security. Let's put in more security cameras. Let's spy on everybody. Is that the answer to security? Not quite. It might be also let's have our own wearable system that provides security or self-care. So I think we have to have a balance between security and security in the same way that we need a balance between surveillance and surveillance. And thus, therein is the very fundamental meta question of the metaverse is who owns the data. And like, you know, you could say that there's cameras everywhere, so I don't need to carry my own. I can just use the surveillance camera to document my life. But the problem is you can't get access to the data. You know, when it serves against those who are purveyors of the surveillance, you just can't get access to the data. When they're guilty, the data disappears. So we need a plurality of repositories of data. And I think that's really what surveillance and security and metaverse, they're all intertwined very inextricably if you read what we've written about valence and metavalence.
So I'll go ahead and step in. And thank you, Steve, for framing that up. I think because I'm looking at some of the questions here with regard to privacy and mental health. What would be also something to think about is looking at the work and the corpus of work that we published. Because we do address those the wider issues around, you know, what do we mean by privacy? Who owns that? You know, what do we mean by what is ethical, quote unquote? What do we mean? But of course, it's contextual. The whole issue of privacy is multimodal, and how we have you know, at least 15. Recommendations on that particular issue, as well as mental health. So I think, you know, again, this is why we're all brought together, is that because our work is intersecting, but I encourage you to read the published papers.
Yeah, we've actually written quite a bit. We just wrote a paper. We wrote a paper recently called Privacy is Surveillance. Search privacy is surveillance. Like, we argue that privacy is literally another form of surveillance. It may sound counterintuitive at first, but I encourage everybody to read it and tell me your thoughts.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing those references as well. I think there's a lot of important work that will be of interest. I see that there are more questions coming in, but since we have other scheduled things here happening, we will try to get back to the questions that we've received online. And I will take the opportunity to thank everybody, thank all of our distinguished speakers. And I see the link too. We will put the links into the email when we send out the post event links so that anyone can also reference some of these materials that were referenced here today. So thank you again to our speakers. Thank you to the audience. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue. Have a good rest of your day.